I'm here today with John Oldfield, client executive at NFP. John has been around the block. He's been in the business for 40 plus years. He's drove truck, he's managed fleets, and he's been in the insurance space. And every time I talk to him, he's got that nice, slick purple truck behind him. John, good to talk to you again. How you doing?
Oh, just awesome, Scott. It's a wonderful Peterbilt, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Well, hey, today we want to give people a little sneak peek of what they're going to see on the webinar coming up at the end of March here. So just wanted to start. We're talking about nuclear verdicts. How can we prevent them? And, you've got some insight into how this whole trend started, what the plaintiff lawyers are up to, including what's happening with some litigation financing. John, for those who aren't up to speed, can you give us the summary here of the history of how these trends started to come?
So nuclear verdicts have become newsworthy of late. It's certainly nothing new. It's not a new trend. And so more than 20 years ago, I was putting on a session on managing risk in trucking fleets at a large ballroom in Hamilton, Ontario. And across the hall was a law society putting on a seminar for lawyers on how to effectively sue trucking fleets on behalf of their clients. And honestly, it was a very simple tactic. It's a matter of what does it take to run a safe trucking fleet, and then simply produce a boilerplate writ that demands an excruciating amount of information to prove that you're one of the top flight trucking fleets in whatever jurisdiction the loss occurred in.
So tell us more about that writ. I understand there's about 99 points, and it's, to your point, just trying to exhaust you.
It's trying to overwhelm the system. And so I've been through a lot of facility audits. I've been through a lot of law cases, and every one of them is meant to test your process in a trucking fleet. When the facility auditor arrives at your operation, it's more actually to test and stress your systems and see if they'll break under pressure. And the plaintiff lawyers are doing exactly the same thing. If you're unable to present the actual requirements as demanded under the writ, obviously, by association, you're considered guilty or lack of evidence in the area. And so if you're asked to produce a driver qualification process file, you do not. It has to be assumed you do not have one. And thus will be assumed by a jury or a judge that you would hire any driver that walked in your door.
Which is, to your point, you're guilty until proven innocent, not the other way around.
That's correct. And everyone tells me it's not fair. And I'm going, no, it's not fair. But in the role of trucking, you must be prepared at all times. It's a high cash flow, low margin, very high risk business that you have decided to come into. And when I talk to fleet owners, it's interesting. As I interview them, I've been interviewing them for 40 years now. The one question that I always find interesting is the best in class fleets always answer one of my questions in a very unique fashion. They didn't come into trucking to buy a lot of trucks, to own a lot of Peterbilts, to make a lot. They came into the industry to change the industry. And the ones who come in to change industry are those very top shelf performers that never see a court of law, because it's very difficult to attack one of these very top shelf fleets.
So John, I want to come back to understanding what they do well so others can think about how they prevent it. Before I ask that question in the flow, I want to make sure that we talk about what's causing the trend. And you had touched on litigation financing. For those who aren't familiar, can you show us or tell us what's happening behind the scenes?
Certainly. And so in order to arrive at a nuclear verdict, it's going to have to, obviously the case has to go to trial. And typically, if you look at all the cases in the past, it's actually trial by jury. In the insurance industry, we consider trial by jury to be a crapshoot. And you add this particular issues we have now, it's called judicial hellholes. And so every year, the American Legal Society presents a paper. It's just released last week, actually, and it shows the most expensive areas in the United States, right down to the county. If you end up in court in these areas, the cost of the actual settlement is much higher than other areas. There's actually a chart as well that will show a percentage of plaintiff verdicts. And so how often in particular states are the judgments in favor of the plaintiffs versus the defendants. And so what happens is, if you say you have, let's just take an example, they've been one of the judicial hellholes for the longest, Cook County, Illinois, i.e. Chicago. So if you ended up into a loss in Chicago, or we've injured third parties, we know it's gonna be an uphill battle. And so typically plaintiffs always win. Settlements are higher than most other jurisdictions in North America. However, it does take a long time to get to that settlement. And what's happened in the court cases is the cost of these trials has driven up dramatically, of course. And so law firms are not able to finance the cost. A lot of them take 7 years to get to court of law before they get to a verdict. The plaintiffs certainly cannot afford to pay the lawyers. And so when I first started in trucking, lawyers demanded a retainer before they take on a client. Those days are gone. And these lawyers now are advertising in bus stops, they're advertising in the internet, and basically they say, you've been involved in an accident with a truck, we'll get you money. And so ultimately what's happened now is litigation financing has come into place. It's global in nature. It's basically around the globe. And the idea is that a law firm will bring a number of cases, litigation financiers. They'll look at them all. They'll look at the case. They'll do the review on the fleet, the circumstances around the loss, and the jurisdiction where it happened. They'll do an actuarial study and determine their percentage ability to win the case. Because litigation financiers, so say I was involved in a loss with a truck in Cook County. I decide to sue the truck fleet for whatever reason. I engage a law firm. I don't have the money required to support the upcoming trial. And so what happens, litigation financiers say, okay, we think we have a good chance of winning this one. We'll finance you, Mr. Oldfield. And they do. Now remember, they only get paid if they win the case. So part of the settlement funds goes to law firms, part of the settlement goes to litigation financiers. If they lose, say we bring a bad case and there's no money, there's no settlement, the actual defendant, the trucking fleet, successfully defends their case and all charges are dropped. The litigation financiers, all that money that's been invested, I don't owe them a thing. That is their loss on the account. And they have to make that up on subsequent wins in future cases. So like trucking, it's a fairly high risk business as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it's legalized gambling in the courtroom.
That's a good way to put it. And yet you'll find there's actual associations defending sort of the moral code of litigation financiers. And so they've had the longest time to mature in the UK. So if you look at some press releases in the UK, they actually have a lot of corporate governance actually. And so it's gambling. It is. It's large stakes. Court cases are very expensive, and ultimately they do honestly only get paid when they win the case, whether it's a case like my own or a class action lawsuit.
So you're going up, so you're not just going against, Tom, Dick, or Harry that you backed into, right? You're potentially getting selected by an entire financing team. So the stakes are high. The best place to prevent it is to stay out of the courtroom in the first place. And you alluded to some of the best carriers, your best clients are those that came in to change the industry. So what do they do so well that keeps them out of the courtroom in the first place, or off of that list of the financiers?
Yeah, it's interesting. Everyone talks about best in class carriers. There's no mystery. And so it's all about benchmarking. And so what happens when you have your day in court? The plaintiff lawyers aren't just arguing about that particular event, what your driver did, what the circumstances were, the condition of the truck, the hours of service, all that comes into play. But they're looking at two other things, looking at the performance of your entire business, your entire operation, all the trucks, all the drivers. And so that particular driver, that particular day, we need to benchmark him against the rest of our drivers. Was that our top gun? Was that a brand new driver that came in? Because we'll talk about the dirty five too, about driver qualification process, about driver training, about driver experience, about driver moral values, of course, right? And so first we have to do is benchmark that loss. And so remember, every loss in a truck fleet is a failure of the risk management team. It's a dismal failure. And so every time there's a loss, that loss should be benchmarked so it does not happen again. That's one of my jobs in the insurance industry. But you're also being judged, your fleet, against the rest of the fleets in that county, that state, that country, wherever it is, of course, right? And that's benchmarking. And so what we do is prepare our fleets in the very early days. We know the loss is going to happen. I get the call. We've been involved in the loss. It's in Cook County, Illinois. It's one of our trucks. We've hit a car. There's a family of 4. They've all gone away in an ambulance to the hospital. All the alarms are going off now. And so that minute we start raising the defense. And so dash camera, we get an examiner out to the scene. We get an attorney out to the scene. And so you start the defense immediately, literally, as soon as the truck is stopped, the driver is on the phone, presuming he's fine, then the defense starts then. And we start benchmarking it all. And so imagine if immediately we're served a writ and we're able to respond to the plaintiff lawyers that you can sue us, but here's our benchmark study. We are the top rated fleet in Illinois. This why, this driver, this is what happened, bang, bang, bang. And so all you're doing is putting impediments. And so like a thief, like a break and entry thief, they're looking for the easy house to break into. And so a plaintiff lawyer, they don't want a tough case. They want an easy case because they have to sell this. They have to pitch this case to litigation financiers. And so if litigation financiers are going, this is a bad one. We have a 7% chance of winning this one. And it's going to be 7 years in the court of law. It's going to be expensive defense costs. We pass. That's what we want. And then what we're able to do then is we're able to negotiate directly with the plaintiff lawyer immediately at the scene. We want to do what's fair and just for all parties involved. The third party may be seriously injured. We may have had a part in causing that as well, of course. You notice I never used the word fault. And so fault, I'm incapable of judging. That's for juries and judges. And so we may be complicit in the loss. And so we have to back ourselves out and look at the case overall and say, what is fair? What is moral? So if we're presenting ourselves as a top shelf fleet, or the top benchmark fleets, we have to be able to prove that in our moral approach to any loss that is in fact a failure of our risk control department, unless our driver is completely exonerated of any responsibility in the loss at all. Or literally the third party was completely at fault.
Well, there's a lot in there, John, that I liked. And, one thing I just want to expand upon is we have a client that taught me this, and what he does and why he values what our software does. He says, Scott, you don't realize how helpful this is, because what he described the same thing. He knows the plaintiff lawyers are sharks, right? They want to sniff around. And for those who've seen The Matrix, they kind of remember those little robots that'll come knocking at the door trying to see if this is easy to get into, are you here or not? And to your point, if it's too hard to break through, don't know that they're there, they're going to move on to the next one, something easy, right? They don't want to pick on someone their own size. They want the easy one. And so that client I'm referring to, he said, Scott, I'm looking to build a wall of defense. He knocks on the door, and before he even picks up the phone, he's got a stack of documentation in his way that just shows, to your point, he knows those 99 bullet points they're coming after for, and he just says, we got our act together. You really want to fight? And that's how he stays out of trouble. And I think that's kind of, it talks about building his wall, his defense wall, and he's got it ready at any given moment.
And everyone in your organization talks the same talk. And so immediately, imagine the first call may come into a dispatcher. You want the right response. And so it's important that everyone understands this is the Alamo, right? And they're not getting in the gates. And to speak to your software too. So what your software does, it's able to do that benchmarking tool. And so what you need to prove is that you're a recruiter. And so what you're looking for is looking for standardized recruiting processes. They're looking for standardized qualifying processes. You're looking for a process that brings all drivers, whether rookies or veterans, up to the same skill levels as quickly as possible in such a fashion that you can actually benchmark all your drivers within your fleet with the drivers out in the US as well. And that's what the SAFER system does. It benchmarks you. And so remember, these plaintiff lawyers and the third parties for that matter have access to so much information about the fleet. And you've seen the YouTube videos. And so every time a truck's involved in a loss now, it's on YouTube. So all you do is pick a fleet name, go into YouTube and watch and see how many trucks are involved in particularly, the messy ones, of course, get named. Yep. I don't want to mention carriers, but there's a couple of carriers that are all over the news all the time.
Right.
It's horrible to defend their actual profile, of course.
Right.
And so it's important to realize what public image you're presenting all the time. And that's why it's important for us, like you say, to put the wall up. And the most contentious part, and you look at the dirty five, it really is. It's all about drivers, of course, right? Because to run a truck fleet, the most contentious area is the humans. And so the equipment, you can build and spec and maintain equipment safely. Same with freight, same with lanes. But the variable, of course, is the human mind. And so it's just a matter of benchmarking the human minds and qualifying them, presenting them, tracking them, and training consistently. And then when the loss does get called in, the interesting thing is I have fleets that they have losses, two great fleets. And when something happens, they don't worry because the wall is solid. It's been tested before. And they know that amongst their contemporaries, their equals, they are one of the top gun fleets. And so they don't worry at all about the actual possibility of these massive verdicts. And so we actually benchmark our clients, we benchmark the level of risk management tools they have in place versus their cost of insurance. And the pure cost doesn't really matter. It's the percentage of gross revenue that the total cost of risk presents them. So that's above and beyond insurance. And so different companies measure total cost of risk differently. There's $1 losses, the cost of risk management processes. But ultimately, when fleets say, how come my cost for insurance is here and my friend over here, his is down here? And going, well, it's because of the risk management strategy. And so we present some solutions with very good returns on our investment. And so if you want a quick return on investment, once upon a time, safety was seen as expense and they were putting the saddle on their own. Right. And now it's a profit center now. And so what you do is you target what you think your total cost of risk should be according to industry standards. And then your job is to drive that down because that presents huge savings actually in that total cost of risk. It's frequency of loss, but it's also severity of loss. And so I run captive insurance programs. And if I look at the actual, we actually measure the individual costs of claims per member and for the group per year. And it's consistently much lower than industry standard. And what we do in the insurance industry, our benchmarking is called actuaries. We actually hire actuaries and their job, it's a bit of I call it magic. They won't like it when I call it magic, but their job is to predict the future based on the past as well as the present. And the present, of course, your risk management strategies. And so we have, for over 17 years, we've outperformed the trucking industry within our captives. And that's not due to anything magic I do. It's just the members within the group are able to outperform the industry as a whole. And that keeps the total cost of risk and thus insurance down.
Well, so John, that's great insight on how do we prevent these from happening. You've explained what the trend is and how the cause, right? A problem identifies, a problem solves. And so when you understand the problem, that's how we can build that wall, build that defense. So for today, that's all the details we're going to give our audience because we're going to ask them to come back on March the 24th. It's a Wednesday at noon. We're going to do a noon Eastern time will be kickoff. So we're going to have John, along with 4 or 5 other panelists who are experts in their respective fields, just understanding the same concepts. What is the trend? Why are they happening? How can you prevent them? So John, thank you for your time today, and thank you for being a part of the panel on the 24th. We're looking forward to having you at the house party.
I'm excited to come to the party. Thanks so much, Scott.